Ladies of Reddit, what is the creepiest guy you have ever come in contact with? In the university library 2 years ago, I was 20, a guy stood staring at me while I looked for a book. I glance at him, ignore him, and scurry to another area to look for my book. I look up, and there he is, still staring at me. Again, I move away, still down, and look in a library computer database for my elusive book. I look up. He's there, still staring at me. I'm feeling perturbed by this point, so I give up on my search and go downstairs to the study rooms to sit with my friends. I'm walking down the stairs, and he appears at the bottom. In front of me. He must have taken the lift. He is blocking my way, and I frown at him, trying to display that I'm not interested. Then he says, "I like you," in this weird, baby-like voice. I audibly groan and push my way past. Last year I was walking home in the dark after a night out, something I've always done as my university town is known to be quite safe. Luckily, I had taken my heels off and was walking in bare feet. A small group of men on bikes begins to follow me, and I subtly get my keys out of my bag and hold them between my knuckles. Their ringleader, a gross-looking guy, begins to say horrible stuff about dragging me down an alleyway and raping me, all sorts of horrible things, while I concentrate on getting to the end of the road and not panicking. As I get to the main road, he tries to pull on my dress, and I turn and brandish my keyed fist. This freaks them out, and I take the opportunity to run into a kebab shop, still open at 4 in the morning, thank God, and tell them what happened. 3 strangers in there run out with the intention of battering the guys while one of their girlfriends holds me tight. The creeps had gone, so the lovely strangers called me a cab. Police got involved, boyfriend and friends came round to help. The ringleader guy got caught but released because he pleaded guilty, then went on to rape 5 women. The ghetto keys through the knuckles trick, it works. A few years ago, I went out to a cocktail bar with a girlfriend of mine. We had just finished work and wanted to have a nice drink, not a rowdy drunk night. This place has a small dance floor with a band, so we were talking dancing on the dance floor after our drink. A guy comes up to us and starts talking, and he seems like a nice guy. We all end up sitting in a booth, talking for another hour and exchanging numbers. The next day he sent me a text asking for my email as he wanted to send me something. That something was a 50-page novella about how we met, how I seduced him and made him fall in love with me. All are written in first person, including lines like "You stared at me from across the bar, I could see it in your eyes, the fire in your loins." And I could barely hear the words as I stared at your wet, luscious lips. Needless to say, I texted him back, saying that it made me extremely uncomfortable and that we should probably not hang out. Most nights, I used to meet my then boyfriend after work as we lived a 15-minute walk away and in a relatively safe neighborhood. One night I walked down and forgot my phone at home, but I figured it would be fine as I had never needed it. He finished his shift early and, thinking I hadn't left to meet him yet, headed home on a different route. When I got there, I didn't see anything wrong. There was someone inside, all the lights were still on. I later found out they were a cleaner, so I sat down on the curb and waited for close to an hour. As I was about to leave, a truck pulled up with 3 very intoxicated men. They started catcalling, and I ignored them at first until they started getting more aggressive in their advances. Eventually, I turned to see if anyone was leaving the restaurant, and I heard one of them say, "Nobody's going to save you now," as they began to park nearby. I could run to the nearest 24-hour grocery and tell someone, but it was probably the creepiest thing anyone has ever said to me. Wow, I'm sorry that happened to you. What happened to me was nowhere near as terrifying as that, but your story reminds me of something that happened to me in my early 20s. I met a guy at the airport when I was on a trip. We were both on a layover in, I guess it was Atlanta. and it turned out we lived relatively close to each other, about an 8-hour drive apart. We hit it off and exchanged numbers and said we'd call when we returned from our respective trips. 5. When I returned from my trip, I got extremely sick and spent about a week in the hospital. He called me several times, but I was too sick to call him back. When I got out, I called him and said, "Sorry for not calling you back. I was sick." He said something that implied that I was lying and that I'd been sick, which really turned me off and sent up red flags. Halfway through the conversation, I decided that he had creeped me out, and I didn't want to visit him, ever. He got angry that I was backing down. He suddenly got sarcastic, and I internally freaked out and hung up. He called a few more times and sent some angry texts, but luckily, he left me alone. Luckily, he didn't have much more info than my first name, and I changed my number not long after that, for unrelated reasons. I first met him in college, and I had multiple coincidental run-ins for the next 6 years. Even after making it clear, I thought he was a creep. He was supposedly an empath suffering from clinical vampirism, an expert masseuse, and polyamorous. To top it all off, he married his incredibly jealous lesbian friend so they could get cheap on-campus couples housing. After their inevitable divorce, my best friend unknowingly moved into the same building as my ex-wife. He was suddenly very interested in mending their friendship, but only on weekends when he thought I was over at my friend's. Eventually, my BF and I moved away, but I'd still get random Facebook messages and emails. I never gave him my email address. Last I heard, he was working in IT, still wearing all black, and trying to rock shoulder-length blonde hair interview with a vampire style. So, back when I was 16 to 17, I used to work at this ghetto, run-down movie theater. The clientele was getting a little unsavory, so the strip mall we were in started bringing in very low-budget security guards. One of them looked like Clint Howard and started carrying the biggest revolver we'd ever seen and would show it off to us all the time, and then told us never to tell that he carried it because he wasn't supposed to be armed. But he wasn't the creepy one. The other one was this really older man. He had ill-fitting dentures or something, so he looked like he had a bitter beer face. We all had a lot of downtime since the business was terrible. He used to crack dirty jokes at us and try to hang around with us teen employees all the time. His hands were always rummaging in his pockets. We thought he was creepy, but we would humor him funnily. He started pointing out hot girls to the guys in the group. The guys would egg him on and check out girls with him. But then he started pointing out younger and younger girls, and eventually, one of the dudes called him out on it when he was hitting on a girl that was about 12 or so. His completely sincere, dead in the eye response? If they're old enough to bleed, they're old enough to be butchered. I've seen plenty of ways worse in my day, but there was just something about how he said it, the look on his face, the way that all his creeping on girls suddenly just didn't seem funny anymore. That I'll never forget. We never really talked to him after that. When I was 16, I went to a dance that was over at 1 a.m. I had to drive my friend home, and we noticed a truck was following us. When we were getting close to her house, he turned the other way. I dropped her off and started driving home. The same truck starts following me. I called my friend, and we were both freaking out. I started turning on random streets, running stop signs and red lights. I start to panic, and I decide if I drive to the movie theater, there might be people outside, and he'll leave. So, I get there, and he parks next to me and stares at me, creepy old fat redneck. I call the police, and they tell me to start driving around again but to stay on the phone with them. After they told me he was pulled over and all that jazz, I went home. It's the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. I still refuse to drive at night by myself. I talked to the police after, and apparently, he's a registered sex offender. The worst was probably the guy who stalked me, among other friends, for 2 years before they finally put me in jail. I was 12. He was 22. He used to follow me around the mall, draft creepy poems for me, and show up at my window at 3 a.m., refusing to go away. Once he ran away to California with some 16-year-old girl and claimed he did it to get away from his feelings for me. Also, when I was 12, I nearly got kidnapped while walking to my friend's house. He pulled up to me with his window rolled down, saying I was his neighbor, and when I politely informed him that I was not and that he must be mistaken, he kept trying to guess where I lived. I started walking faster, and he started picking up the pace and getting closer to me. So I booked it to my friend's door and banged on it until she let me in. When I was about 20, some guy in a pickup truck almost ran me over in a gas station parking lot, and when I came out from paying for my gas, I saw that his door was open, so I figured, it'll mean mug out of this guy to let him know he's a bad guy. I peered inside his door, and he was naked from the waist down, making intense eye contact with me and furiously masturbating. I turned on my heel and noped it back inside. Most recently, I was at a bowling alley with my boyfriend and some friends and went to the bar to get a drink. This group of dudes had been trying to chat me up every time I walked past, which I had mostly ignored. While standing at the bar waiting for my beer, one of them approached and started touching my hair. I was immediately all, "What do you think you're doing? Don't touch me." He then argues that it's just my hair, so it doesn't count. I told him to go off and walked away. With a friend at the fair. We had just purchased some food and were looking for a place to sit, but there were no empty tables. There was, however, one table that had only a man and a little girl at it, and they were both sitting on the same side, so my friend and I decided to see if we could sit with him. Getting closer, it's obvious that this guy is a real redneck. This isn't out of the ordinary. I'd say about 50% of the people I know are rednecks, so the fact that he has maybe 10 teeth doesn't really bother me all that much. We ask if we can sit, then start eating our food. The man has the little girl by the wrist and isn't letting go of her. Even when they're both eating, but whatever, not our business. At this point, I'm starting to get a weird vibe from him, but I ignore it. He picks up a cooler and sets it on the bench next to him, then looks at us. "Why don't you girls have any drinks?" My friend and I exchange glances. We aren't thirsty. He starts taking cans of Sprite out of his cooler. "You have to have drinks. Here, you can have these." It would have seemed like a man just being friends if I hadn't already been feeling uneasy. Plus, we were a pair of unattended girls, age 13 at the most. We told him, "No, thank you." He replies, "Come on, they're in cans. It's not like they're poisoned or anything." At that moment, he had let go of the little girl's hand, and she immediately bolted, so he chased after her. As soon as he turned his back, my friend and I just left and didn't see him for the rest of the time we were at the fair. I've known him since middle school, and he's been into me for about that long. He'd send me Facebook messages periodically, usually about unusual subjects but nothing extremely weird. I started dating a college guy when I was a high school senior. Creepy guy, CG, made a few comments about burning down my boyfriend's university. My friends all brushed them off as jokes. I called him out on being a psycho, and he stopped with those. The creepiest thing was when he showed up at my house one night while my boyfriend was visiting. I was throwing a party that weekend, and he claimed he'd just gotten the date wrong. I didn't send him away because he lived 30 minutes away, but I really didn't want to hang out with him at all. My boyfriend, sibling, CG, and I ended up hanging out for a few hours, during which CG made multiple comments about my boyfriend and my relationship. The entire night was just awkward, but at least boyfriend didn't catch on until I told him about CG's comments later. I was living overseas in Greece while my dad was stationed there. The Turkish Navy was also in port, and the base had given them permission to be on base. I was in the little internet cafe thing on MSN Messenger. This Turkish guy came over to my computer, looked at my screen, and pointed at it. I just nodded at him like, yeah, I'm on this computer. He went and sat at another one. And a couple of seconds later, I got a chat request from a weird username. It was him. I accepted it, and he just kept saying hello. I got really creeped out and logged off even though I was planning to stay longer. As I was walking out, I noticed he was getting up too. I immediately started walking back to my dad's office across the street. I was right in front of the barracks when the Turkish guy caught up with me. He put his arm around me like he knew me and tried walking with me. I tried getting his arm off me and pointed at my dad's office. He nodded and then grabbed me by my shoulders and kissed me. I was so shocked and disgusted I just ducked away from him and walked as fast as I could to my dad's office and told him everything. The whole time I was shaking and felt so embarrassed and violated. All I could think was I finally understood why some victims of rape feel guilt. I wondered if I had given him some sort of sign that I hadn't meant to. At the end of the day, he was just a creep. My dad found the guy and demanded to see his captain so he could let him know one of his sailors had just kissed the CMC's 16-year-old daughter on his base. According to the Turkish captain, the guy would be banned from all future ports until they returned home. It was my first week in a large city, and I was walking back from a college orientation dance party thing. I left because the skimpy dress my roommate lent me for the event was making me so uncomfortable. It wasn't a bad dress, but I never wore anything so tight. So, I get turned around the instant I leave and ask someone which was his blank street, and he's like, oh, this way, I'll show you. We chat a little, he tells me I'm beautiful. Then I realized we'd walked more than the block it should have taken us. I'm getting worried, and I start to realize while he may only be my height, he's muscular. Then he's like, oh, you should meet my friend. I'll call him, and I started panicking. I didn't recognize anything. I was well and truly lost. So, my saviors, two girls a little older than me, walked by the other way, and I said where the blank street is. And they must have seen how scared I was and his hulking dude next to me, so they walked back, which was the opposite direction. All the way to campus security, who took me up to my dorm room. A lesson in the North is you can't just talk to people on the street, especially don't expect men to be chivalrous. I worked as a cashier at a drugstore in high school, where we had a repeat customer that was a city police officer. He was in his 40s, more than likely divorced, always bought Gatorade, and had an RX filled. He would always tell me I had beautiful eyes, which was creepy enough, but once he inquired if I had a boyfriend. I was 16 to 17 at the time, and the fact that he frequented in full police uniform made me very afraid of him. Being young and not fully knowing how to handle the situation, I would just answer his questions. So, once he found out I had a boyfriend, he started to ask what I thought about my boyfriend's father and if I ever looked at him in that way, because he was probably the same age. He came into the store weekly and always harped on me having a boyfriend my age. I needed an older man who could take care of me, he said. The absolute worst was when he point blank asked me, when do you turn legal? This went on for a couple of years, and him being a police officer, I guess, meant that everyone was too scared to say anything to him or do anything about it. It got to where co-workers would alert me when he was in the store, and I was allowed to stay hidden in the back room until he left. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to The Internet Surfer on YouTube channel for more horror and scary stories.